A big night for candidates on both sides of the aisle. 502 delegates hanging in the balance, 118 for Republicans, 384 for Democrats. Here to break it all down, John Hart, editor-in-chief at Opportunity Lives and former communications director for Oklahoma Senator Tom Coburn. Also Doug Thornell, managing director at SKD Knickerbocker, former Democratic Committee spokesman and former advisor to Maryland Congressman Chris Van Hollen. Welcome to both of you. So, Doug, we've run out of appendages to tack on to Super Tuesday. It used to be that the first Super Tuesday was the day that sort of determined who the nominees were going to be. We're on our third or fourth one this time around. Is this the day that ends this race, or does it go on all the way to California on both parties, for both parties?
Well, John, you know, they call this the Acela primary, and I think that Secretary Clinton's going to have a pretty smooth ride tonight. I think she could potentially win 5 out of 5 states, and that really makes the path for Senator Sanders not only narrow, but as narrow as a tightrope. And I think that my hunch is he stays in until California. But I bet you'll see a little bit of an adjustment in his message. These attacks on Clinton for being unqualified and other things like that, I think, are going to go away.
Then why stay in?
Well, because he's got a lot of supporters who believe in him and want him to stay in. He's got a lot of money coming in, so money isn't an issue. And, you know, like any competitive person, it's hard to drop out. You know, it's just a very hard thing to do. And Secretary Clinton stayed until the end. I think Bernie Sanders will as well, but I think he's going to have to, for the good of the party, I think he's going to have to adjust how he talks about Secretary Clinton and talks about this race.
Speaking of competitive, John, Donald Trump is saying that, you know, this collusion, he calls it, between his two remaining rivals is all about politics and bad policy. You don't exactly see it the same way.
No, not at all. I think, you know, Trump's problem is that he's only getting 38% of the popular vote. So, in other words, 62% of Republican primary voters want someone other than Donald Trump to be the nominee. And Trump alone is responsible for not closing the deal. He's not a real conservative. He's not even a Republican by my definition and the definition of a lot of voters. So what's happening is Cruz and Kasich are appealing to that 62% of the party that wants another option. And it's a matter of survival for them. This is not going to be a decisive night tonight. There are upcoming primaries that probably will be, Indiana, for example. So if Trump doesn't win Indiana and Cruz beats him there, there's a good chance of an open convention, which will give either Cruz or Kasich a reasonable shot of becoming the nominee.
You say 62% of Republicans want somebody else, but, you know, you're going back to when there were lots of other candidates to vote for, and those other candidates aren't in the race now.
Right, but at this stage in the race 4 years ago, there were 4 people in the race, and Romney ended up getting over 50% of the vote, of the popular vote. So Trump is the least popular frontrunner in modern history on the Republican side. And the reason he's not popular is because his campaign chief advisor, Paul Manafort, had this embarrassing statement where he said Trump is just playing a part. Well, voters don't want someone who's playing a part. They want someone who's committed to a set of principles. And Trump has no real principles. Cruz and Kasich do, and they're having a thoughtful competition about who's going to be the best nominee.
Doug, as you watch the Republican race, I mean, one thing it seems clear that voters really like is an outsider. Now, if you're right, and if Hillary Clinton seals the deal today, she is about as far from a political outsider as you can get. What does that mean for her prospects as the Democratic potential nominee?
Well, I don't think there are really any outsiders remaining. I mean, Trump's a billionaire. He's been, you know, very active in politics in the business world. It's hard for me to describe him as an outsider. Both Kasich and Cruz have been involved in politics for years and years and years. And Bernie Sanders has been in Congress for years as well. So I think that's a political label that politicians use to try to give them an advantage. I think you're dealing with a bunch of insiders. I think as far as Secretary Clinton goes, look, she matches up very well against Donald Trump in the general election. You have comments like the one that John made and other Republicans have made about Trump and his vulnerabilities. And then you have Ted Cruz, who's probably the likely #2, who may be even more unpopular than Donald Trump. And so I think she's got I think her prospects in the general are strong. She's got to run a very good race, though, because it's not going to be handed to her.
But, John, you know, you might not like Donald Trump, and it sounds to me like you don't, but if he becomes the nominee, you know, most Republicans say they will eventually support the nominee of their party. What do you say?
Well, I'm afraid that's not going to happen because, again, Trump has not lined up with Republican values, conservative values. And to Doug's point, is Trump is a one-man stimulus program for people like Doug and Democratic consultants and attack ad makers. So it would be a field day if Trump was the nominee. There's so much material to work with that he would be blown out, and it would have a damaging effect down the ballot for other races in states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and so forth, and Senate and House races. As
we said, today is a big day. We'll see what happens when the votes are in. John Hart, Doug Thornell, thank you both.
Thanks a lot, John.
Fox News is America's election headquarters. Tune in tonight for our special coverage of the Battle for the East, anchored by Megyn Kelly and Bret Baier. Kicks off at 6 p.m. Eastern Time.